Graphics are an art form, and as an art form, it requires skill. Skill is something that requires time and passion to cultivate. I don't have time to be artistic, so I decided that after my foray into Let 'em Dare 45 to make a game with no graphics. But what about a story? You can't have a story without seeing. And to that I say, have you ever read a book? Therefore, what if I make a visual novel without the visuals? A text-based RPG. The simple solution. Use RenPy or something similar to make a game. However, I am a programmer, so I made my own engine using LibGDX. The game starts off quite simply. You are greeted by the ability to create your own character. As someone who, around this time of making it, was getting into Dungeons and Dragons, I wanted to make some sort of character creation screen similar to that, or similar to, say, something like the old school Dungeons and Dragons 1990 CRPGs. But I realized I can't just take the Dungeons and Dragons stats, so I made my own, focusing on different sets of skills that you could pick one or the other, starting with more or less the same letters. So repair would be health, force or finesse is your choice of force or finesse. Courage and charisma would be either you're more of a courageous character, you try to go face first into encounters, or charisma is your character tries to talk themselves out of situations. And then intelligence, ingenuity, and image. Image is perception, essentially. I just couldn't find a better word for it. Ingenuity is, can you really create solutions to problems, think your way out of problems? And intelligence, believe it or not, is not that. Intelligence is how much do you know? So let's create an arbitrary character, shall we? By that I mean I'm literally just going to spam a bunch of buttons and click return to start the game. So the game just starts off with basically an intro dialogue, and it's a text adventure game. Now, sometimes text is a bit weird and whatever, but this is your first kind of stage in the game, a text stage. And then you move on to a town. This town has a couple of options of where to go: a tavern, a laboratory, the Hamlet Square, fields, just darkness, and a passage up north. Now, the most fleshed out of these is the tavern. So this would be a building, which is different. Each of these different stages are different stages. They have a different archetype, and depending on what you input into them, you get a different idea. So you walk into the tavern, and it's pretty much, there's a fight going on. That's your introduction fight. Or you could just, what I did is, you can talk to the lonely patron. So you approach the lonely patron, however, he does not seem to take note of you. This is the most important of the stages. An NPC encounter. This game is, I really like the idea of games where you can really talk your way out of fighting. If you really invest yourself, you can talk your way out of fighting. You can go through the whole game as a pacifist, essentially. At this stage would be the lonely patron. So you can rob him if you have a high enough dexterity. That would be later replaced with finesse. And you can then immediately just greet him. You can rob him and greet him. That would have, say, but however, what if he does notice you? What if that lowers your specific reputation with that specific character? Now, say we take a step back. We go back to the tavern and we choose to interrupt the fight. So here we're greeted with a battle, which is even another one of the stages that you could possibly encounter. So we just have one weapon, our own fists, and here we have a circle with 6 different enemies. In this specific battle, 3 of these are, if I remember, people, and the other 3 are just objects. So let's attack one. Now, this is just for testing purposes. In the future, I might actually make it so that you don't see the enemies. You are blinded, essentially, as kind of going back to the themes of the Let 'em Dare game I made. But if you say attack, you can say one enemy is down. Our health, there is no death penalty, so we have -8 health. And you can see that, say, if we attack the second one, nothing happens, because the second one here is just an empty object. So we can attack the third, and then eventually attack the 5th, and that ends the battle. So say we talk actually to the bartender. Since we completed the fight, we can say about that fight, yes, thank you very much for stopping that. Here's some coin and a small gift of gratitude, as you seem someone of capable strength. And he hands you a dagger. That's how you get your first weapon. You stop the fight, and then you speak to the bartender about it. So to some extent, there are quests in the game. There is even another quest if you sit at the lighthearted table, which I'm not going to go into because it's more or less the same. But overall, this game, I built it as an engine. I built it to have expandability. So this would be another place you could enter, the darkness, or you could just return to the hamlet. So let me take you a quick tour through the engine. Here we have the engine, or it's more of a framework, I'd say, because you don't really build the game, you code the game, and this just makes life easier. So you have, for example, here's a text stage that you start off with. You have basically this whole thing, this whole 200-line chunk of code. It's not honestly that much, but if you go to go to stages and go to intro, this is all you have to do to make a text stage. You have to write this code. You have a decision tree. This is the decision tree for whatever happens in the game. Now, I could have made the code nicer, and that's one of the reasons why I stopped, because I wanted to eventually go back when I was more familiar with programming and make it look nicer. The heart of the game is essentially you have a decision tree for each type of stage, and then you have a constructor where you just have a bunch of choice buttons. Now, the choice button can either be a matrix of choice buttons, it's its own class, or it can be one specific choice button. And choice buttons are simple. It's just a button that gives you a choice. Now, of course, as I've said before, there are buildings, there are fights, these are just the 2 intro, I had nowhere else to put them. We have NPCs, which are the most expansive class, and then you have towns, which I believe are the shortest class. So if we go to, say, the Lonely Patron, which is under Hamlet, and if we go to the Lonely Patron, we see that all this class is it just extends NPC, and you have the text for him, you have all the possible choices, and then you have the whole decision tree. And then you have an update helper for just in case you have things that, like, variables that need to be changed, like just in case he was robbed, for example. Now, for assets, I have text as well, because what's a text adventure without any text? So here's all the text I made for the game. So if we go to, say, the Lonely Patron under Hamlet, it would be Lonely Patron. And this is what the text looks like. It's just a text file that I export from Google Drive. And it has basically, this would be the line number. This would be if I want it to be a break. So basically a break would just say, okay, go on to the next choice. And finally, I did some other nice things for the game. Like I made some images. Now these images are pretty simple. The background here, which is very, very large resolution, but you could see it in the game, is just clouds, but mess around with an Illustrator so that they looked nice. I also actually made some music for the game. Now, I know nothing, and I mean literally nothing about music theory, just how to put notes on a screen. So I downloaded MuseScore, and I just put a bunch of notes together into something that was coherent and made some music. So that's about it. That's the game I made. It, and considering how little it is, it still took me like 3-4 weeks to make, and a decent amount of effort. But what that gives you, when you make your own game engine, when you make your own framework, you have expandability. You can really expand on the game. You can make it stage by stage instead of having to code the same thing over and over again. So it just makes life easier. Now, I stopped work on this project for one simple reason, and that's just I'm not really able to write the long stretches of dialogue, of descriptions needed to complete a game like this at the moment, because I have school and school. And on top of all that, school. So, as a result, the game is on a somewhat semi-permanent hiatus until I have the time or also the desire to revisit an idea in the distant future, because whenever you're writing a game, you really need to have a solid concept that you really want to write about. And you have to have a plan. Otherwise, you get burnt out. And that's what I learned from this game. And also how to make a game engine. So both of those were fun. And I hope to make more games in the future, and maybe even one day something I can publish. I shall see you all in the next video. Bye-bye.